You found your way to Whispers of Crimes, a quiet corner where the shadows of the past are gently told. Here, we speak of real crimes and mysteries, not to shock or scare, but to wonder, to reflect, and maybe to help you fall asleep. So close your eyes, let your thoughts slow down, and come with me into tonight's case. He was a shadow in the night, a whisper on the phone. For over a decade, he slipped through the cracks, taunting, stalking, killing, 13 murders, 50 rapes, and then he vanished. 40 years later, the mask came off, and the truth was more chilling than anyone imagined. The Golden State Killer was never far away. Chapter 1: A trail of terror that spanned a decade. Between 1974 and 1986, California became the hunting ground for one of the most prolific and terrifying criminals in American history. The man who would come to be known as the Golden State Killer started his crimes as a serial burglar, then escalated to rape and eventually murder. Over the course of more than a decade, he committed at least 13 murders, over 50 rapes, and hundreds of burglaries across the state. He operated in Sacramento, Contra Costa, Ventura, Santa Barbara, and Orange counties, leaving different police departments chasing a ghost. Initially, the crimes seemed disconnected. In Visalia, a wave of break-ins in the mid-70s was attributed to the so-called Visalia ransacker. Around the same time, Sacramento was plagued by the East Area rapists, who invaded homes, raped women often in front of their partners, and taunted law enforcement with chilling phone calls and letters. Later, in Southern California, a murderer known as the original Night Stalker emerged, binding couples and killing them brutally in their own homes. It wasn't until decades later, with advances in DNA testing, that investigators realized all of these offenders were the same man. The connection between the East Area rapist and the original Night Stalker was made in 2001 through DNA. The Visalia ransacker connection came later through patterns, timelines, and survivor accounts. The puzzle pieces finally fit, but the identity of the man behind these horrors remained elusive. The killer's modus operandi was methodical and cruel. He would surveil neighborhoods, sometimes even calling potential victims ahead of time. Once inside, he took control with military-like precision. Victims were tied up with shoelaces or bindings made from household items, blindfolded and threatened into silence. Often, he would spend hours inside their homes, eating food from their kitchen, rearranging belongings, or simply waiting in the dark psychological warfare at its most personal. Chapter 2: Cold Cases, New Science. For decades, survivors and families of victims waited for answers. The case became one of the largest unsolved crime sprees in U.S. history, and a symbol of both forensic frustration and the limitations of traditional police work. Dozens of detectives worked on it over the years with little progress. But the one piece of evidence that remained constant was DNA. Investigators had preserved biological samples from multiple crime scenes. In the 1990s and early 2000s, DNA technology had advanced enough to connect various cases to the same unknown suspect. But without a name to attach to the profile, the information led nowhere. The suspect was not in any national criminal database. Time passed and leads went cold. Everything changed in 2018. A relatively new technique, genetic genealogy, offered a radical new approach. Unlike traditional DNA comparison, which searches for exact matches in law enforcement databases, genetic genealogy uses partial matches to build family trees through public DNA platforms. In this case, investigators uploaded the killer's DNA to GetMatch, a website where people voluntarily upload genetic data to trace their ancestry. From there, a genealogist worked backward, identifying distant relatives of the suspect. Using family trees, census data, birth and death certificates, and newspaper archives, the team narrowed down a list of potential suspects. Among them was a man named Joseph James Dangello, a 72-year-old former police officer living in Citrus Heights, California. His age, military background, and prior employment history all aligned disturbingly well with the timeline of the Golden State Killer's crimes. Chapter 3. The Double Life of Joseph James Dangello. Joseph James Dangello was born in 1945 in Bath, New York. He served in the U.S. Navy during the Vietnam War and later pursued a career in law enforcement. In the mid-1970s, he was employed as a police officer in Exeter, California, ironically, in the same area where the Visalia ransacker operated. He later joined the Auburn Police Department, but was fired in 1979 after being caught shoplifting dog repellent and a hammer. After his dismissal, Dangello disappeared from public view. He worked as a truck mechanic and settled into a quiet suburban life. To his neighbors, he was an eccentric retiree with a short temper. He was known for yelling at people who came too close to his property, but no one suspected he was a serial predator. He had children, grandchildren, and lived in an unremarkable home on Canyon Oak Drive, just a few miles from where many of his crimes had occurred. Psychologically, Dangello fit the profile of what criminal profilers called an organized offender. He planned meticulously, avoided leaving evidence, and adapted his tactics over time. Some victims later reported hearing him speak to himself, possibly suggesting dissociation or an alternate persona. This theory was bolstered by his bizarre behavior during interrogations, where he appeared to speak in different voices, referring to a so-called Jerry inside his head. Whether this indicated a true mental disorder or a manipulation remains debatable. What's clear is that Dangello maintained an extraordinary ability to compartmentalize. By day, he was a father and a mechanic. By night, he was terror incarnate. Chapter 4. Surveillance, DNA, and a quiet arrest. Once Joseph Dangello emerged as a prime suspect, law enforcement needed to match his DNA to that of the Golden State Killer. But they had to do it without alerting him. For weeks they placed Dangello under surveillance, observing his routines and waiting for a discarded item they could collect for testing. The breakthrough came when detectives retrieved a tissue from his garbage. Testing confirmed what they had feared and hoped for. The DNA was a perfect match. On April 24th, 2018, officers quietly surrounded Dangello's home and took him into custody. The arrest was shockingly uneventful. When officers informed him of the charges, he reportedly muttered, "I have a roast in the oven." The man who had evaded capture for over 40 years was arrested not in a dramatic standoff, but in a quiet Sacramento suburb with dinner cooking in the background. Inside his home, investigators found disturbing evidence, items believed to be stolen from victims, meticulously organized and stored. Computers contained writings that appeared to fantasize about or reflect on his crimes. Some writings revealed attempts to suppress his urges, while others celebrated the domination and control he had exerted. The arrest sent shockwaves across the nation. Survivors who had waited decades for justice were finally able to put a name to their attacker. Investigators, many of whom had spent large portions of their careers on the case, were finally vindicated. Chapter 5. The Legal Labyrinth, the Arrest of Joseph. Dangello led to one of the most complicated prosecutions in California's history. He faced 13 counts of first-degree murder and 13 counts of kidnapping with special circumstances, allowing prosecutors to seek the death penalty. However, many of his crimes, especially the rapes, could not be charged because the statute of limitations had expired. Multiple jurisdictions had to coordinate their cases. From Ventura to Sacramento to Contra Costa County, each district attorney had a stake in the outcome. Court proceedings began in 2020 and were heavily impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Hearings were held remotely or in modified in-person formats, and victims provided statements from socially distanced spaces. In a surprising twist, Dangelo agreed to a plea deal in June 2020. He pleaded guilty to all 13 murders and admitted guilt in 62 other crimes, including rapes and burglaries. The agreement spared him the death penalty in exchange for multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. The plea hearing lasted nearly 7 hours. One by one, prosecutors laid out the gruesome details of each crime, and Dangelo responded with a soft yes or guilty. He sat in a wheelchair, appearing frail and expressionless, but victims saw through the facade. In the impact statements delivered in court, survivors confronted him directly, some with rage, others with sorrow. His sentencing in August 2020 finalized the legal chapter. He received 26 life sentences, effectively guaranteeing he would die in prison. Chapter 6. The psychology of fear and control. Joseph Dangelo's case continues to be studied by psychologists and criminologists for its complexity. Unlike many serial killers, Dangelo exhibited high levels of self-control and adaptability. His crimes evolved over time, growing in sophistication and brutality. He often broke into homes days before an attack, unlocked windows, unloaded guns, or planted ligatures. Experts believe Dangelo derived satisfaction not just from sexual violence, but from domination, humiliation, and psychological torment. In several cases, he forced victims to listen to him rummage through their homes while threatening them with death. In others, he would place dishes on the male victim's back and say that if he heard them move, the woman would die. The use of fear as a psychological weapon distinguished him. He called former victims months or years later, whispering threats like, "Remember when we played?" rekindling trauma and asserting ongoing control. His background as a police officer gave him insider knowledge of investigative techniques. He wore gloves, avoided fingerprints, and left few traces. Some believe his law enforcement training helped him manipulate the system and stay one step ahead. Yet underneath the control was profound psychological dysfunction. Some experts have speculated that Dangelo may have suffered from a form of antisocial personality disorder. Others suggest narcissistic traits or even psychopathy. The truth likely lies in a complex mix of early trauma, power pathology, and a desire to dominate others at any cost. Chapter 7. A legacy of pain and a warning for the future. The arrest and conviction of Joseph James Dangelo marked the end of one of the longest manhunts in American criminal history. But it did not end the pain. Survivors still live with flashbacks, PTSD, and unresolved questions. For families of murder victims, there is the bitter knowledge that their loved ones' final moments were shaped by unimaginable cruelty. Yet there is also progress. The Golden State Killer case ushered in a new era for cold case investigations. Since 2018, genetic genealogy has helped solve dozens of high-profile cases. It has become a standard tool for law enforcement, offering hope to families of victims whose cases once seemed unsolvable. However, the case also raised ethical questions about privacy and surveillance. The use of public genealogy databases for criminal investigations sparked debates about consent and data usage. New guidelines have since been implemented to balance the rights of individuals with the pursuit of justice. Joseph Dangelo now lives in a prison medical facility where he will likely die. He has never offered a full confession, nor expressed genuine remorse. His silence leaves many questions unanswered, but one fact remains: he is no longer free to hurt anyone. The Golden State Killer is behind bars, but the scars he left behind and the lessons of his capture will endure for generations. That's all for tonight's story. Another thread in the web of true crime, quietly unraveling as the night goes on. If you're still with me, thanks for listening. And if sleep has already taken you, May your dreams be peaceful and your mind at ease. I'll be here next time by the fire with another story waiting to be told. Good night, and don't forget to lock your doors.